Welcome back, everyone, to the Financial Philosophers Podcast. Today we have a special guest joining us. I'd like to introduce you all to Bree Kahn. Bree Kahn, she is the Chief Experience Officer and Child-Free Wealth Specialist at ChildFree Wealth. Bree, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah, this is a really cool topic that I've wanted to explore for a long time. And I got very excited when Danny had got in touch with you to talk about what financial planning is like with child-free clients. I encounter people more commonly than I would have anticipated who are child-free, and that's the life
Mhm.
they've chosen to live. It's always been an interesting topic to me. So I'm excited to jump into that topic with you. But before we go down the rabbit hole on child-free planning, I first just briefly wanted to hear a high-level story on how you got into this field of financial planning and what drew you to working with child-free clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say it was an accident. I never planned to work with child-free clients or really kind of took on that identity. What happened was I one day got suggested a Facebook group for child-free people, joined it, was in it for a few months, and then I was in marketing originally, knew I wanted to go into finance, and there were two posts one night within 10 minutes of each other. One said, "What do you do now?" And the other one said, "What do you want to do?" And I commented on both and I said, "Hey, I'm in social media marketing, but I want to be a CFP." And Dr. Zigmont, founder of Child Free Wealth, he saw both of those and said, "Hey, I'm a CFP. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'd love to recommend your stuff for marketing to somebody that I know who needs help." And so I connected with him a couple years ago now, and then we talked I think we originally connected in like November, and I started with Child Free Wealth in April of 2023. So it was quite a while, but we were supposed to talk for 30 minutes and it ended up being 2 hours. And finally, after a couple of those, I just said, "Hey, can I have a job?" And he goes, "Let me think about that." Because it was just him at the time. And he called me back the next day and said, "I think we can make that work." And so that's really how I got into it. It wasn't any sort of planning. I wasn't seeking this out. It was just, I knew I wanted to work on becoming a CFP, and I'm actively working towards that right now. And the niche was just an accident, but it's been really fun.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a really cool
I
story.
I think that is such a great example of how it's always worth asking,
Mhm.
right? The worst someone can say is no,
Yeah.
and it got you to where you are. And I wish you the best of luck with the CFP. I am also currently going through that same program.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a definitely a challenging program. It takes a while, but it is so fun, and I'm very glad that I made that jump. And I think connecting with Dr. J really made that jump go faster than I thought, because I wasn't expecting to already be so far along in the process and being super close to the end now at this point in time. I thought it'd be another few years before I actually moved into finance.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think on the back of that, then, when we are talking about child-free planning, I think that title is going to catch a lot of people's attention. So it's worth maybe opening this up a little bit and discussing what that means. How would you describe what it means to be a child-free client and financial planner who works with child-free clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about child free as being, you don't have kids, you're not planning on having kids ever. It's not I'm child free for the weekend, my kids are with somebody else. Nope, nothing like that. It's just you don't have kids, you're not planning on having kids. And childless is often used as like the term for if you tried to have kids and for whatever reason you couldn't. But really, there are some people who are, others would define as childless, but they embrace the child free. So we just say, you don't have kids, you're not planning on having kids. And we use the word child free instead of you don't have kids, you're not planning on having kids wealth, because that's a really long name. So it's just child free wealth instead. I said in the beginning, didn't really ever embrace the child free name. I still just, I don't have kids. I'm not planning on having kids. And I use child free to describe myself because it's a very quick and easy way. And most people kind of get it, or at least they have heard of it now, especially with all of the comments in the media and everything happening. Like they hear that and they at least know what it means. It doesn't mean that there's not comments about, "Oh, you should be having kids," coming back, because I get those too. It's just nope, I don't have kids. My life looks a lot different. And therefore, financial planning looks a lot different too, because I'm not going for those same goals of building up a ton of generational wealth to pass on to my kids because my kids don't exist and they never will. So it is very, what can I do for not only my life, but around the people around me as well and my wife as well? How can like the two of us together build those things? And so then we work with clients and say, hey, this is really your life. What do you want it to look like? And we always say we're life and financial planning because we put life first, then your finances second. What do you want life to look like? So many people don't ever think about that. They live a life where, they were either pushed into that life by somebody else or they started to go down one path and then they kind of fall back to that traditional life plan, which is you go to school, you get married, you have kids, you build wealth, you retire, you pass on that wealth to the next generation. So we're not doing any of that. It looks completely different. We're saying, hey, what can we do during your lifetime, whether that be giving to people, whether that be maybe just taking jobs that don't pay as much, but you enjoy a lot more because you don't care about the net worth in the end. And it really kind of goes along with that Die with Zero framework from the book Bill Perkins as Die with Zero. Dr. J. Zigmont, he has taken and written a new book. It's called A Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. It's coming out at the end of the year here.
Mm.
And in that, he really marries A Simple Path to Wealth and then by J.L. Collins and then Die with Zero by Bill Perkins and comes out with like a child-free spin on everything. And what does that look like when you don't have kids and you're not planning on having kids? So that is where we start anyway.
I love it. Sounds like there's a big emphasis on this intentional living aspect, if I'm interpreting that correctly. Are you familiar with George Kinder's life planning?
Yeah, absolutely. We do use those questions with clients often.
To our listeners, if you haven't heard of George Kinder, definitely look up uh, George Kinder and life planning. There are some really profound questions that are even worth reading just on your own. But didn't mean to interrupt you there.
You're totally fine. We do those 3 questions, and then at the end, we also add on another question, and we say, "What do you need to change today? What change needs to happen?" And for many people, that's kind of where they're able to take that next step and realize, "Oh, no, like, this has not been going the way I want it to, and it really needs to change going forward in order for me to live a life that I want." And I really like how you use the word intentionality because that is so, so true. With us, it is very intentional living. I don't think the intentional part necessarily means that it has to be, we've been thinking about this for years and years on end. It means flexibility and it means the ability to try things. We have clients who will say, hey, I want to move here. We'll get there. We'll get looking at things. We'll go through things. And they'll say, actually, nope, not doing that anymore. Looked at it. Don't want to do it. Not interested. Or something else pops up that they find more interested in and they say, actually, I'm going to move here instead. And so that flexibility needs planning for. A conversation that's often had is, should you buy a home or should you rent a home? Well, for many of our clients, if they're going to be moving all around, myself included, it is, we're not necessarily going to buy something until we kind of settle, or maybe not at all, because there is the ability to go wherever you want, whenever you want, quite quickly because you're not worrying about, well, do I need to figure out if this is a good school district for the kids or what does anything like that look like? It's not a question in our lives. It's just, what does it work for us? And can we make it happen? There's plenty of air transportation and driving. So if someone does want to go back to a certain area for whatever reason, they can do that. But you're not having to try and be close to that support system just to be close and have somebody take the kids for the weekend, anything like that. So very intentional, but it is intentionally flexible.
Yeah, Bree, that was really insightful and great. And, when I'm thinking about working with clients, I used to be a client facing advisor. I didn't have any, well, actually, I take that back. I had maybe one or two clients that didn't have children. They were retired and probably in their 70s. But I never had the privilege of working with younger clients who were intentionally living a life without children. And I've always been curious about that. And so, what are some of the key ways that child free financial planning is different? How do you see different goals come about? What do they look like? And, what are maybe some different types of planning opportunities people pursue as a child free client?
Many people are kind of looking into that fire path, so the financial independence, retire early if they haven't already. And oftentimes people will use 4% as that rule. Well, if you're trying to just retire early, great, that's one thing. But if you don't care about how much money you pass on when you die, and you're using that 4% rule and continuing to sustain, the principal and all that money there, you don't need to follow 4% rule. We don't have a specific number. Like, I wish I could tell you a specific percentage to target for. It's really, we just have to sit down and plan, like, hey, actually, you could probably spend more. And oftentimes we do. We have clients who they'll sit down and we'll ask them, how much do you want to spend a year on travel? Because that seems to be a really big one. And they'll give us a number and we'll say, okay, now let's double that. And people are like, I don't know that I can. Well, I can tell you right now, we have clients with multi six-figure travel budgets every year because what else
Wow.
are they going to do with the money? Yeah. Yeah, wow is right. Their assignment every time is to send pictures from their travels.
Nice.
And let me
Yep.
tell you, they're amazing. With that, if those are your goals and you don't care about how much money you have at the end, then we can spend more throughout your lifetime. And that might be on things that you want for yourself. That might be on charitable giving. We have some clients who we've said, hey, we can spend more on here. And they go, yeah, that's great. But, I actually want to give more too. So sometimes clients will match the amount they spend on their fund every year with the amount that they give. So if they're spending $50,000 a year on fun, they're giving $50,000 a year, whatever that may be. It might be just the ability to leave work early and kind of cut back, cut back completely. A lot of times we see that most of our clients don't intend to retire completely. They're always going to have some sort of thing to do. And that's where we use that file, financial independence, live early versus fire. It's kind of like coast fi. It's just, hey, you don't need to be working for the money anymore because you're just building an estate that you don't care about. So you might be working for an estate that you don't necessarily care about. And instead of doing that and continuing to work and work and work, why not cut back now? So there's one story that I have is I met with a individual and they were near traditional retirement age. I looked at everything, went through all their numbers, and they could have retired yesterday if they wanted to. They didn't. They intended to keep working for the next 3 to 4 years. And I asked them, I said, okay, you're telling me that you want to keep working, but we're really not loving what we're doing. We feel like we can't retire because we don't have enough, which in reality, they had plenty. And I said, what do you want to do with your life when you retire? And their response was, I don't know. And then I said, well, has anybody ever asked you that before? And they said, no, nobody's ever asked me that before. So we think oftentimes when we're working with our child free clients, it's very much a realization that the questions about life and what they want to do and what they want to go for in the future, if they do retire or if they cut back on work early, what those things look like, those questions are being missed. And the numbers are the only thing that are being looked at. That really, really, I mean, think about that. To be near traditional retirement age and to not know what you want to do with your life and nobody ever asking you that, that's kind of disheartening. That just made me really sad.
I want to riff on something that you just said there, Bree. You got me thinking about kind of the standard financial planning advice that a lot of advisors give to clients. And a lot of that is on the backdrop of how do we gather as many assets as possible and preserve those assets as much as we can. And sometimes in that culture, advisors are reluctant to encourage people to think about spending their assets or like living
Mhm.
an intentional life. And I was really struck by a lot of things you said when talking through a lot of that. In particular, I smiled and I wrote it down when you said, whatever their travel budget is, we tell them to double it. That is not something I hear very often from a financial planner. And I love that because it goes against the notion that, well, it lends itself to living an intentional life. I think is the theme I keep coming back to. And I just really like that. And, that it seems like, to your point, when nobody ever bothered to ask the question of what they envision their life looking like, well, then they just kind of stick to the status quo, right? Like,
Mhm.
why change? I mean, when you when you go through these questions with clients, would you say the majority of them this is the first time they've been hit with those questions where you're asking them to open up the box, the sandbox, and jump in, or is it something that they've already been used to? I'm just curious to know whether that's a frame of mind most of the clients you work with have even explored, or is it brand new to them?
It's often brand new to them. We have a podcast, the Child Free Wealth podcast, and there's an episode on there in which we go through these questions and Dr. J asks them to me and I answer them, the Kinder's life questions and then the what do you need to change. And so sometimes they'll hear them on there and they'll also hear more about, our lives because we try and ask these questions and we'll ask them to each other to get one another to open up and then help clients that way too. But there's something different when, we're sitting across from somebody via Google Meet and talking to them virtually there and asking that question. It just hits differently to having somebody ask that directly to you. And so oftentimes it does take a while for people to think about it because, yeah, they're not seeing this in traditional everyday life. And you brought up a really good point too about the gathering assets thing and reluctance to have people spend more because that's letting go of assets. So we charge flat fee. We're always going to charge flat
Mm,
fee for services because for us to charge a percentage of assets and then have clients want to spend down their assets, well, that whether we like it or not, it can subconsciously create a conflict of interest and an avoidance to encourage clients to spend money on the things that are important to them and spend down that wealth when that's their goal. So we don't charge a percentage, we just charge a flat fee because, hey, everybody's paying the exact same and I can tell you to double and it's not going to impact me at all. And consciously or subconsciously, we don't want any of that impact in there.
I really like that. Danny and I did, to our listeners, you may recall we did an episode on all the ways financial advisors get paid, and we walked through every single compensation model, and we talked about very similar things that you just mentioned. I think one could argue that every model, no matter which compensation model, has some conflict of interest, but
Mhm.
the assets under management has always been an interesting one to me because obviously there are incredible financial planners out there who do charge assets under management, and I think the strength of one's character, if it's there, often shines through and puts their client in the best interest. But it is a conflict, to your point, and I think that does bleed into the culture of not encouraging people to live the fullest life or to spend their money or to be intentional. I'm just so glad you are bringing all these points up because I think they are important for people to be aware of, especially when they're encountering a crossroads of like, hey, maybe I want to talk to somebody about, what should I be doing with my finances and how's the best way to move forward. It's just good to raise general awareness about these types of things. It's awesome.
Yeah.
There was something I wanted to, jump on and follow through with there. I was curious. Chris and I talk about the fire movement quite a bit. We both have an interest in it, but it's not something that we are actively working towards in terms of retiring early. We view it more from the financial independence side that then gives you the ability to have freedom to do whatever you might want to do, whether that is retire early, retire to something else, drop your hours and work on something that's lower paying or just a different, arena of work, as you mentioned before. Going from fire and talking about the file movement, and this was the first time that I had actually heard that term, was reading through your website and seeing you write about it. That financial independence live early. I thought it was really interesting how you wrote that if fire is an on off switch for work, file is a dimmer switch. And I was hoping that you could walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that dimmer switch, think of dimmer lights. You want to have the right amount of lighting at the right amount of time. If you're watching a movie, probably going to have those lights a little bit lower, maybe off. We're doing something with friends over, we're going to have those lights a little bit higher. It's finding that right amount of work in the right points in time. So what do you need in your life at that time? Maybe you're like, "Hey, I'm just don't have anything to do. I'm kind of bored. I want to work a lot more." Cool, you can do that. But you're not doing it because you have to work. And maybe you get to a point and you say, nope, not feeling work anymore. We're just going to be done. Or maybe we have people who say, actually, I do want to work, but I don't want to work full hours. So I know I've been at that point in my life where I've only worked 20, 30 hours a week. And I've been at points where I work full time like I am now. But it's getting to a point where none of that is a requirement. And it's very much reaching that financial independence and building goals. So your work life can be a choice. It doesn't have to be. There is something to be said, I think, for people who go to work because they have to, and that feeling that it provides. And I know like what that's like. I'm not saying this is about that person, but I'm saying that feeling comes up. It's a very different feeling when you don't have to work, when you can just say, nope, I'm doing this because I truly enjoy it versus saying I'm doing this because I have to. My wife and I, for an example, and we have many clients like this, but we have agreed that we live on one income. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, like while we both work full time, we both absolutely love our jobs. If one of us wanted to quit our job, it would be fine. We wouldn't need both of us working. It's just, hey, the one income goes towards goals. The other one is just to live on. And that's fine. Reaching that point. So, like, I can say I get up every day and I do this because I want to. I do this and it's fun. And if I didn't want to work, that would be okay too. So, that's kind of the point where we go that file with clients. And sometimes it's just building up enough financial independence too, to a certain point where saying, hey, both people in the relationship, if one is in a relationship at all, they don't have to work at all. So it is deciding what's right for you at the right time.
I
Completely
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
I love the FILE acronym so much more than the FIRE acronym, and I think your analogy on the dimmer switch and how you were like, if you're watching a movie and maybe you dim it really nicely or even just turn them off entirely. If you have friends over, you turn it on. What a profound analogy when thinking about this financial independence movement, right? And I think that is maybe this is where we start changing the culture around that. I think the financial independence retire early gets a lot of flack because people think of retire early as like an all or nothing kind of thing. Like you're
Yeah.
just gonna retire.
Sit on the
Yeah, you're
beach.
done.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're never gonna earn any other income in your life. You're nothing.
For every day the rest of your life. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think this really helps clarify. It gives a more feasible path. I think more relatable path to people that hey, this is something you can actually do if it's a goal of yours. I had a few other questions too, Bree, that I was curious about when it comes to certain planning strategies. It's just things that Danny and I were talking about before we jumped on. The first one, which I was really curious about, Danny came up with this question. I loved it. Do you typically suggest lower amounts of insurance than the average financial planner? And Danny, correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. I think you're thinking like maybe life insurance or something along those lines.
Yeah, generally, it would be life
Yeah.
insurance, insurance that you would typically carry for beneficiaries and to provide liquidity for your estate, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So life insurance many times isn't going to be needed by many of our child-free clients because really, what you said earlier right there now is for beneficiaries. Well, I mean, if I die, my wife's left behind, but she's okay. She doesn't need me. It's a lot of things you can think about is, does your partner need your income to survive? If they do, then we can have a case for life insurance. If there is an inheritance that one is expecting, and we've used this before with clients too, one person is expecting a large inheritance. If they pass, their partner is not going to receive any sort of inheritance from that family member. It's just going to be, nope, it's cut off. And so if that plan includes that inheritance being built into the plan and kind of providing security, and that might mean, the inheritance isn't all coming after the other person's parents pass. It might just be they're receiving annual gifts and that's kind of sustaining part of their lifestyle. We're going to want to consider life insurance on that person who has the inheritance coming or who's receiving those annual gifts because that is a really big part of it. Sometimes we'll see if there's mortgages left behind, there'll be people who just say, hey, I feel a lot better to have life insurance. And it's really I'm not going to ever sit here and argue with a client if they're like, hey, I just feel better having life insurance. Most of the time, that cost is so small. And if they want to have that to just help them feel a little bit more confident, if they've still got some of those large bills, cool. But in general, you really don't need life insurance if you're child free because there's not going to be anybody depending on your income. if both spouses are working or if you guys have reached that financial independence already.
That makes sense. I do like that you mentioned the maybe it's a comfort level thing for some people. I really like the
Mhm,
example you gave where maybe you don't want to leave your partner with a mortgage or some random debts. So maybe you plan to have something to pay those off, but it does make sense that if you don't have future generations of your own heirs you're worrying about, it's just not even it doesn't even have to be part of the financial equation. So
mhm.
a lot of pressure relief on that front. Yeah, with estate planning, I am curious. So you briefly mentioned, charitable intentions or not earlier. Do you see like an even? I mean, do you see more child-free clients, or I should say, do you find that more child-free clients have more charitable intentions, or do you not really notice a difference between child-free clients and clients who do have children regarding their charitable intentions?
Yeah, I can say that I've definitely seen a lot of child-free clients who have charitable intentions. Now, I can't speak directly to child-free clients versus parents because I've seen very limited number of parents because we do specialize in working with child-free people. But the parents that I have seen, it hasn't been as much of a conversation in charitable giving. It's really with the child-free clients who've it's been much more of a conversation. And simply because they say, I don't have anybody that I really want to leave this to. Maybe they'll have like nieces or nephews and they put money aside in a 529 for them or a brokerage account, something like that. But oftentimes it's, nope, I'll give them a little bit here for a specific thing. And then I want to give this to a charity. And so we do have a lot of clients who are very charitably inclined and constantly giving and just very generous too. So it doesn't have to be just to a charity. Sometimes it's, hey, we're gifting to friends. Sometimes, I've seen instances where people will take care of their parents and they'll put money aside for them. And they're very kind and caring would be the kind of the term I would use versus just charity specific focused.
That's great.
Nice. Maybe that really cool aunt that loves to support the nieces and nephews.
We actually have somebody, and this has been shared before, but they have a fund for nieces and nephews, and they call it the "Get the Babies to Love Me Fund," which I just love the name of that. It is so fun, but they just set aside money for them, and so that's a really common thing is setting aside money for nieces and nephews and kind of making it like a fun thing too, and they don't need to know about it, but it's there for them, but at a certain point in time, it will be there
I love
waiting.
that.
So,
That's nice. Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned some clients with children, and that kind of led me to another question that I had. And Chris and I talk about this a lot. Sometimes life happens,
Mhm.
and you had meant to be child free, and a child comes along. And I was curious when a client does happen to have a child at some point, do they typically end up seeking out a new firm? Do you continue to plan for them? How does that normally look?
Yeah, so we haven't had anyone who's had a child as far as being like our child-free clients. The parents we
Okay.
have are usually parents of our child-free individuals, and it's because they need planning and they need help, and they're often the ones who are told, "Hey, you can take care of mom and dad." And so then we'll help with them with their parents. Um, we have had instances where they'll like take people in and care for them, other people's children, but it's not necessarily them having child. If that were to happen, which I wouldn't, I wouldn't imagine. However, with the tightening reproductive rights laws in the United States right now, I don't know. I don't know what that future is going to look like, but I'm not going to take and turn somebody away if they wanted to continue. It would just be a conversation of, hey, this is kind of where our focus is, and we could continue to help you, but you might be better served by somebody else. So it's not a you have a child
Okay.
on accident and you're out the door. I would
Yeah, that
never
makes
never do
sense.
that to anybody because those relationships can be hard to build,
Absolutely.
and that trust in the planner. But it's just, hey, we want to make sure you're getting the best service for you.
I think
So
it speaks
Definitely.
a testament to your niche of focusing on child-free clients. The fact that you haven't had that situation arise again, I think that speaks volumes to emphasizing the intentional life, right? I think people who are child-free especially if they've maybe fallen into if you've come onto their radar. I presume it's probably because they're very serious about intentionally living a life child free. But that is
Mhm.
fascinating answer, and I think that's really cool that you end up working with some of the child free clients' parents just by virtue of the relationship. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it paints such a big picture too, because oftentimes planners, and I have some other friends in the industry who specifically focus on generational planning. And so they're often talking about, hey, we need to plan, this parent is going to give to this one. And I had a conversation with them recently. We were out to dinner, and I said, that's great. That's great. But have you considered it the other way too? Like, do we need to maybe think about what that impact is on that child and not just the impact on the parent? Like, how can we create a scenario which is best for both generations, not just one? And so we're looking up and we're going, okay, what do mom and dad have that are now going to impact you? Whether that be you're going to be receiving inheritance. We have found multiple people who will tell them, we have kind of a few different questions that we'll send to them and have them go through with their parents. And they have found multiple things that they were unaware of that completely change their financial plan in a good way. And other times, then we've also found people who, it completely changes their financial plan in a less desirable way. And in the end, that is a choice. Like, oftentimes we'll either find that parents have more money than we anticipated or a lot less money than we anticipated. And so if it's a lot less, then sometimes it'll be a conversation of what are those boundaries going to look like going forward, as far as, are we going to provide financial support? Are they going to be able to move in with you? And if so, what are kind of the requirements and restrictions around that?
Mm.
Because if you have a case in which something happens to a parent and you are very suddenly put into the position where you are paying for things for them, whether that be medical care, housing, anything, the decisions which you make at that time can be very different than decisions that you've made and considered ahead of time. And so those are many of the questions that we will go through with clients, just to make it a little bit easier on our clients. And so that's how we end up with the parents. It's, hey, we need to have you need to go have these conversations with your mom and dad, so that way we can figure out what planning looks like for you and then report back to us. And then they'll go, I found this situation and it's really good for me, but I have no idea how to handle it. Can you work with my parents? Or, I found the situation, it's not looking so good for me. Can you work with my parents?
Yeah, that was awesome. I particularly like the comment you made about instead of looking downward, looking or looking upward, like to the generation that was above you, your parents.
Mm.
Just again, very intentional in how they fit into the overall equation with the client. Really, really awesome stuff. I've learned a ton today, Bree. This has been fantastic, and we really, really appreciate you hopping on to walk us through what child-free planning looks like, how it's different, and just some of the interesting nuances that people might need to be aware of, especially if they're someone who is also child free, right? So, for anybody, for our listeners who would be interested in learning more, especially if they are child free or want to live that type of life, where can people find you or find out more about you?
You can follow us on all of our social medias. It's just Child Free Wealth. We have a podcast by the same name, Child Free Wealth. And then our website is childfreewealth.com. There is the new book coming out that I mentioned earlier by Dr. Jay Zigmont, The Child Free Guide to Life and Money. And so you can go ahead, and if you pre order that, then there's also a giveaway we're doing between now and the end of the year. And so if you pre order the book and then email a receipt of your pre order to media@childfreewealth.com, we're giving away each month one Child Free Wealth checkup where you submit a bunch of information, we review it, and we kind of give you a, hey, this is where you're at. And so that is something to look for too.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely
Awesome.
be interested in seeing that book as well. And Bree, again, thank you so much for your time. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode. Hope you got something out of it. We appreciate you all coming. Bree, thanks again. To our listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.